The stagecoach rattled to a violent stop outside the weathered wooden station in Chloride, New Mexico territory, and Violet Owens stumbled out into the dusty afternoon with hands that would not stop shaking. She clutched her small carpetbag so tightly her knuckles had gone white, and her eyes darted from shadow to shadow along the main street as if expecting something terrible to emerge at any moment. The year was 1883, and she had traveled 3 weeks from Philadelphia to escape a danger that still seemed to follow her like a dark cloud, its presence heavy in every breath she took. The town was smaller than she had imagined, just a collection of sun-bleached buildings scattered along a dirt road that cut through the desert landscape like a scar. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and imposing against the endless sky. Everything here felt exposed, raw, so different from the cobblestone streets and brick buildings she had known all her life. A hot wind kicked up dust devils that danced between the general store and the saloon, and somewhere a dog barked twice before falling silent. Violet stood frozen beside the stage, unable to make her feet move forward. The driver had already tossed down her trunk and was preparing to continue on to Silver City. She knew she should pick it up, should find the boarding house where she had arranged a room through hurried correspondence, but fear kept her rooted to that spot. Fear that the man who had killed her brother might have followed her west. Fear that she would never feel safe again. Fear that coming here had been the worst mistake of her life. "Miss, you all right there?" The voice came from behind her, low and gentle, carrying a hint of concern that made her spin around so fast she nearly lost her balance. The man who had spoken stood a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands revealing sandy brown hair that fell just past his collar. He was tall and lean, with the kind of weathered face that came from years under the desert sun, but his eyes were kind. They were the palest blue she had ever seen, like pieces of sky that had somehow found their way into a human face. Violet opened her mouth to speak but found her throat had gone too dry for words. She clutched her bag tighter and took an involuntary step backward. The man noticed immediately and held up both hands in a gesture of peace. "I did not mean to startle you. Name is Samuel Ingram. I work the ranch just outside town, came in for supplies." He kept his voice soft, almost musical in its cadence. "You look like you might be lost is all, new to Chloride." She managed a small nod, her voice finally returning in a whisper. "Yes, I am looking for the boarding house, Mrs. Patterson's place. That would be 2 buildings down on the left, the one with the blue shutters." Samuel made no move to come closer, seeming to understand that she needed space. "I could walk you there if you like, help with that trunk. Town is safe enough, but a lady traveling alone might appreciate the company." Violet hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her not to trust anyone, especially not a strange man in a strange town. But there was something about the way he stood there, patient and unhurried, that made her think perhaps not everyone in the world meant her harm. Besides, she could not stand here in the street forever. "I would appreciate that," she said quietly, surprised at her own acceptance. Samuel moved slowly to pick up her trunk, settling it on his shoulder as if it weighed nothing at all. He kept a generous distance as they began walking down the street, not crowding her space. "You come from the East. Your dress, if you do not mind me saying, looks like city fashion." "Philadelphia." The word came out heavier than she intended, weighted with everything she had left behind. Long journey. Must have had a powerful reason to come all this way. He said it casually, not prying, just making conversation. When she did not respond, he did not press. Instead, he pointed out various establishments as they walked. "That is Anderson's General Store, best prices you will find. The building with the green door is Doc Fletcher's office. Good man if you ever need medical attention." and that there is the Silver Dollar Saloon, though I expect a lady like yourself will not have much cause to visit." Despite her fear, Violet found herself listening. His voice had a calming quality, like steady rain on a roof or the distant sound of church bells. When they reached the boarding house, he set her trunk down gently on the porch and stepped back. "Mrs. Patterson is a good woman. She will take care of you." He started to turn away, then paused. "If you need anything while you are settling in, the Ingram Ranch is about 5 miles northwest. Anyone in town can give you directions, though I hope you will not have need of help." "Thank you," Violet managed, and she meant it. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, someone had shown her kindness without wanting anything in return. Samuel placed his hat back on his head and tipped it slightly. "Welcome to Chloride, miss." As he walked away, Violet felt the tightness in her chest ease just a fraction. She turned to knock on the boarding house door, still trembling but somehow feeling less alone than she had moments before. Mrs. Patterson proved to be exactly as her letters had suggested. A plump woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a sensible bun and flour, perpetually dusting her apron. She welcomed Violet with warm efficiency, showing her to a small but clean room on the second floor that looked out over the main street. "You arrived on a good day," Mrs. Patterson said as she helped bring up the trunk. "Sundays and Wednesdays, we have communal dinner for the boarders. Tonight happens to be Wednesday, so you will meet the others at 6 if you are feeling up to it. No pressure if you would rather rest from your journey." Violet unpacked her few belongings with shaking hands, hanging her 2 spare dresses in the narrow wardrobe and arranging her hairbrush and mirror on the small dresser. Everything she owned now fit in this tiny room. The life she had known, the comfortable home she had shared with her brother Daniel, all of that was gone. Daniel himself was gone, murdered 3 months ago in an alley 2 blocks from their home by a man named Marcus Webb over a gambling debt Daniel had never even owed. The shaking got worse as the memories flooded back. She sat on the edge of the bed and wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly. Marcus Webb had been arrested, but his brother Theodore had made it very clear that the Owens family would pay for the inconvenience. He had shown up at her door twice with threats that grew more explicit each time. The police had done nothing. Her friends had urged her to leave the city, so she had fled west to this remote mining town where she knew no one and no one knew her, hoping distance would equal safety. A knock on her door made her jump so violently she nearly fell off the bed. "Just me, dear," came Mrs. Patterson's muffled voice. "Brought you some tea. Thought you might need it." Violet opened the door to find the older woman holding a delicate cup on a saucer, steam rising in lazy curls. "I noticed you looked a bit peaked when you arrived, long journey and all." Mrs. Patterson handed her the tea with a knowing look. "This town might seem rough around the edges, but folks here look out for each other. You are safe in my house." "Thank you." Violet accepted the tea gratefully, feeling its warmth seep into her cold hands. "That's Samuel Ingram who helped you with your trunk. He is good people. Works harder than any 3 men I know, and honest as the day is long. His family has owned that ranch for near 20 years now, Mrs. Patterson smoothed her apron. "I only mention it because I saw how frightened you looked. Whatever you are running from, you will find more allies than enemies here." After Mrs. Patterson left, Violet sipped her tea and looked out the window at the dusty street below. She watched people go about their business, miners heading toward the saloon, a woman carrying a basket of laundry, children chasing a hoop with a stick. Normal life continuing as it always did. She wondered if she would ever feel normal again. That evening, she forced herself to go downstairs for dinner, despite wanting nothing more than to hide in her room. The dining room held a long table where 5 other boarders had already gathered. They looked up as she entered, and Violet had to consciously keep herself from fleeing back upstairs. "Everyone, this is Miss Violet Owens from Philadelphia," Mrs. Patterson announced cheerfully. "She will be staying with us. Violet, this is Mr. and Mrs. Chen, who run the laundry service, Miss Sarah Colton, who teaches at the schoolhouse, Mr. Frank Morris, who works as a clerk at the assay office, and Mr. James Whitten, who is a surveyor." They each greeted her warmly, though Violet could only manage quiet responses. She took a seat at the far end of the table, grateful that no one pressed her with too many questions. The conversation flowed around her as platters of roasted chicken, potatoes, and vegetables made their rounds. She picked at her food, appetite still diminished by anxiety. "Did you see Samuel Ingram in town today?" Sarah Colton asked the table at large. She was a pretty woman in her late 20s with auburn hair and an animated way of speaking. "I swear that man gets more handsome every time I see him. Such a shame he never seems interested in courting." "Too busy with that ranch," Mr. Morris said around a mouthful of potato. "Since his father passed last year, he runs the whole operation himself. Cattle, horses, the works. No time for socializing." "Someone should tell him life is more than work," Sarah said with a theatrical sigh. "A man like that should have a wife and family." Violet kept her eyes on her plate, but she found herself thinking about the gentle cowboy who had helped her that afternoon. Something about him had penetrated her wall of fear, if only briefly. The days that followed fell into a careful routine. Violet spent most of her time in her room or taking short walks when the street was relatively empty. She wrote letters to her few remaining friends in Philadelphia, vague about her exact location, telling them only that she had found a safe place out west. She had enough money saved to last several months, but she knew eventually she would need to find work. The problem was that everything still terrified her. Loud noises made her flinch. Unexpected footsteps sent her heart racing. She jumped at shadows and spent sleepless nights, convinced that every creak of the old building was Theodore Webb coming to make good on his threats. A week after her arrival, Violet ventured into the general store to purchase some writing paper and ink. The store was dim and crowded with merchandise, every surface covered with goods ranging from farming implements to bolts of fabric. She was examining the paper selection when the door banged open, and 3 miners tramped in, their voices loud and rough from drink, though it was barely noon. "Give us a bottle of the good whiskey, Anderson," one of them called out. "We struck a decent vein today and aim to celebrate." Their boisterous energy filled the small space. Violet felt her chest tighten and her breathing become shallow. She tried to edge toward the door, but one of the miners stumbled backward and blocked her path. "Well, hello there," he said, his breath reeking of alcohol. "Ain't seen you around before. You new in town, darling?" "Excuse me," Violet whispered, trying to slip past him. He reached out and caught her arm. "Now don't be unfriendly, just trying to make conversation." Panic flooded through her. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Her vision started to tunnel, and her whole body went rigid with terror that had nothing to do with the present moment and everything to do with the night Theodore Webb had grabbed her arm in exactly this way, had pulled her close, and promised in a whisper that she would pay for her brother's interference. "Let go of me," she managed, her voice barely audible. "Oh, come on, sweetheart, I am just being friendly." "I think the lady asked you to let go." The new voice cut through Violet's panic. She looked up to see Samuel Ingram standing in the doorway, his expression calm but his eyes hard as flint. He was not a huge man, but something in his bearing made him seem to fill the space. The miner dropped Violet's arm immediately. "No harm meant, Sam, just having a bit of fun." "Go sleep it off, Jack. You too, Tom and Pete, come back when you are sober. Samuel's voice remained quiet, but carried an unmistakable authority. The three miners grumbled but shuffled out without further protest. The store fell silent except for the ticking of a clock on the wall. Violet stood frozen, still caught in the grip of her panic, unable to make her body respond to her commands. Samuel approached slowly, stopping several feet away. "You are all right now. They are gone." She could not speak, could not move. Her hands trembled so violently she dropped her reticule, and its contents scattered across the wooden floor. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she fought them back, desperate not to completely fall apart in public. "Let me help you with that," Samuel said softly. He crouched down and began gathering her belongings with careful movements, giving her time to collect herself. When everything was back in her bag, he stood and held it out to her, not coming any closer. "I am sorry that happened. Jack is not a bad man when he is sober, but he gets thoughtless when he drinks." "Thank you," Violet whispered, taking her bag with shaking hands. "Can I walk you back to the boarding house?" She nodded, not trusting her voice any further. They walked in silence, Samuel maintaining that same respectful distance he had kept during their first meeting. The afternoon sun beat down on them, and the street was busy with activity, but Violet barely registered any of it. Her heart still pounded, and her mind kept replaying the moment the miner had grabbed her arm, overlaying it with worse memories. When they reached the boarding house, Samuel turned to face her with concern evident in his pale blue eyes. "Miss Owens, I do not mean to pry into your business, but you seem more frightened than a simple misunderstanding with a drunk miner would warrant. If you are in some kind of trouble, there are people here who would help." Violet looked at him, at this man who had now twice shown her kindness, and felt something crack in the armor she had built around herself. "I am not certain that anyone can help," she said quietly, "but I thank you for your concern. Well, if you change your mind, the offer stands." He tipped his hat. "Try to have a good day, Miss Owens." She watched him walk away again, this cowboy with the gentle voice and patient manner, and wished she was brave enough to trust him with the truth. That night at dinner, Sarah Colton mentioned that the town was planning a social gathering the following Saturday. "Everyone is invited," she said brightly. "There will be music and dancing. You should come, Violet. It would be a good way to meet people." The thought of being in a crowded room filled with strangers made Violet's stomach turn, but Mrs. Patterson was nodding encouragingly. "It would do you good to get out. You spend too much time in that room." "I will think about it," Violet said, knowing she had no intention of going. But as the week progressed, she found herself thinking about Samuel Ingram more than she cared to admit. She wondered if he would be at the social, if he ever took time away from his ranch to attend such events. The way he had stepped in to help her twice now, the gentle patience he showed, the quiet strength he carried, all of it circled through her mind during the long, sleepless nights. Saturday arrived with clear skies and temperatures that would be pleasant once the sun went down. Violet spent the day in her room as usual, listening to the sounds of the town preparing for the evening's festivities. As sunset approached, she heard the other boarders getting ready, their excited chatter drifting through the walls. There was a knock on her door. When she opened it, she found Mrs. Patterson standing there with a determined expression. "Now, I know you said you were not planning to attend tonight, but I think you should reconsider. You cannot hide forever, dear. Whatever happened to you back east, you are here now and life goes on." The older woman's voice was firm but kind. "Besides, Samuel Ingram specifically asked if you would be there. I think he worries about you." Something in Violet's chest fluttered at that information. "He asked about me. Came by this afternoon to drop off some beef for next week's meals. Mentioned he hoped to see you tonight." Mrs. Patterson smiled. That boy has never shown interest in a woman that I have seen, not in all the years I have known him. You have caught his attention." "I am not looking for a suitor," Violet said quickly. "Maybe not. But maybe what you need is a friend, and Samuel Ingram is the kind of friend worth having." Mrs. Patterson patted her shoulder. "Think about it. The gathering starts at 7 and goes until late. You could just stop by for an hour, see how you feel, after Mrs. Patterson left. Violet stood in front of her mirror and studied her reflection. She looked pale and drawn, with dark circles under her eyes from too many sleepless nights. Her dark hair hung limp and her brown eyes looked haunted. She barely recognized herself. But something made her reach for her best dress, a deep green cotton that brought out the color in her eyes. Something made her pin up her hair with more care than usual and pinch her cheeks to bring color to them. She told herself she was just tired of being a prisoner to her fear. She told herself it had nothing to do with a certain cowboy with pale blue eyes. The social was being held in the largest space available, which happened to be the second floor of the general store, where Mr. Anderson had cleared out merchandise to create a makeshift dance hall. By the time Violet arrived, shortly after 7, the room was already crowded with what seemed like half the town. Lanterns hung from the ceiling, casting warm light over the gathering. A small group of musicians in the corner played a lively fiddle tune while couples swung around the dance floor. Violet stood just inside the doorway, her courage already faltering. The noise and press of bodies made her want to flee immediately. She was on the verge of turning around when she heard that now familiar voice. "You came." Samuel stood beside her, cleaned up from his ranch work in a pressed shirt and vest, his hair still slightly damp as if he had recently bathed. He was not smiling, but his eyes held unmistakable warmth. "Mrs. Patterson convinced me," Violet admitted. "I am glad she did. Would you like some punch?" "It is actually decent. No one has spiked it yet." She nodded, and he led her through the crowd to a table where drinks and food had been laid out. He poured 2 cups of punch and handed her one, then guided her to a slightly quieter corner where they could talk without shouting over the music. "How have you been settling in?" he asked. "As well as can be expected, I suppose." Violet sipped her punch, grateful to have something to do with her hands. "That incident at the store the other day, I hope it did not sour you too much on Chloride. Most folks here are good people." "You have been very kind. I appreciate it more than you know." They fell into conversation, Samuel asking gentle questions about her life in Philadelphia and sharing stories about growing up on the ranch. He had a way of talking that made her feel heard, and he never pushed when she glossed over certain topics. Violet found herself relaxing incrementally, the knot of anxiety in her chest loosening just a bit. An hour passed, then another. The evening wore on, and couples continued dancing while others clustered in groups, talking and laughing. Violet caught Sarah Colton watching them from across the room with an expression of surprised approval. "Would you like to dance?" Samuel asked eventually as the musicians struck up a slower waltz. Violet's first instinct was to refuse, but she looked at his outstretched hand and thought about what Mrs. Patterson had said. Life goes on. She could not hide forever. "I am not very good," she warned. "Neither am I. We will figure it out together." She placed her hand in his, feeling the callous strength of his palm, and let him lead her onto the floor. He held her properly with respectful distance, but she could feel the warmth of his presence. They moved somewhat awkwardly at first, neither of them particularly skilled dancers, but gradually found a rhythm. "You are shaking," Samuel said softly. "I am always shaking," Violet admitted before she could stop herself. He looked down at her with such gentle concern that she felt tears threaten again. "Whatever you are afraid of, you are safe here. I know we barely know each other, but I want you to know that. You are safe." Something about the quiet certainty in his voice made her believe him, at least in that moment. She let herself relax into the dance, let herself feel the music and the gentle guidance of his lead. For a few minutes, she was just a woman dancing with a kind man at a town social, not a terrified refugee running from threats and violence. When the song ended, Samuel escorted her back to their corner. "Thank you for the dance," he said. "I know that took courage. How did you know?" She found herself asking. "I have seen that look before. My mother had it after the Comanche raid when I was young. Took her years to stop jumping at every sound." His expression grew distant with memory. "Fear like that does not come from nothing. It comes from surviving something terrible." Violet looked at him with new understanding. "Your mother is she passed 5 years ago. Natural causes, thankfully, but she got her peace back eventually. I just want you to know that it is possible." They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing more easily than Violet had thought possible. Samuel told her about running the ranch, about the challenges of drought and cattle rustling, about his plans to expand into horse breeding. She found herself telling him about her work in Philadelphia, helping at a charitable organization, about the books she loved to read, about missing the ocean even though it was just a river estuary. She did not tell him about Daniel or Theodore Webb, could not bring herself to speak those words out loud yet, but Samuel seemed to understand that some stories needed time. When the evening finally wound down and people began heading home, Samuel insisted on walking her back to the boarding house. The night air was cool and desert clean, the sky overhead thick with stars like nothing she had ever seen in the city. "Thank you for tonight," Violet said when they reached her door. "I almost did not come. I am glad you did. Would you like to have lunch tomorrow? There is a decent restaurant next to the assay office. Nothing fancy, but the food is good." Violet hesitated. Spending time with Samuel felt dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with Theodore Webb and everything to do with the unfamiliar warmth growing in her chest. But the alternative was returning to her solitary room and her endless cycle of fear. "I would like that," she heard herself say. His smile transformed his whole face. "1 o'clock then. Good night, Miss Owens." "Violet," she said impulsively. "You can call me Violet." "Good night, Violet. I will see you tomorrow." She watched him walk away into the darkness, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart was doing strange things. This was not what she had come west for. She had come to hide, to be invisible, to escape. Forming an attachment to someone, especially someone as genuinely good as Samuel seemed to be, was a complication she had not anticipated and probably could not afford. But when she lay in bed that night, for the first time since arriving in Chloride, she fell asleep without trembling. Sunday dawned bright and hot. Violet spent the morning trying on every dress she owned, frustrated with herself for caring so much about her appearance. It was just lunch with a friend, she told herself. It meant nothing, except it did mean something. She could feel it in the way her stomach fluttered with anticipation, in the way time seemed to crawl until 1 o'clock arrived. Samuel was waiting outside the restaurant when she arrived, looking nervous himself. He offered his arm and she took it, letting him lead her inside to a small table by the window. The restaurant was simple but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of cooking meat hanging in the air. They ordered roast beef and potatoes, and while they waited, Samuel leaned forward with his elbows on the table. "I have a confession to make. I have been hoping for an excuse to talk to you since the day you arrived in town." "Why?" Violet asked, genuinely puzzled. "Because you are different from anyone I have met before. There is something about you, even scared as you are, there is a strength underneath. I could see it that first day, the way you made yourself accept help even though everything in you wanted to run." He shook his head slightly. I am not saying this right. I just mean that I would like to know you better if you will let me. Violet felt her face flush. I am not sure I am very good company right now. Let me be the judge of that. Over lunch, they talked more easily than seemed possible for two people who barely knew each other. Samuel told her about losing his father to a heart ailment the previous year, about the weight of responsibility that had fallen on his shoulders. Violet told him about growing up with just her older brother after their parents died in a typhoid epidemic, about how Daniel had raised her from age 12. She did not mention Daniel's death yet, but Samuel seemed to sense the grief behind her words. "You have lost someone recently," he said quietly. It was not a question. Violet nodded, not trusting her voice. "I am sorry. Loss is hard enough without whatever else sent you running west." He reached across the table and very gently touched her hand. "You do not have to tell me anything you are not ready to tell. I just want you to know that I am here as a friend, for whatever you need." That simple offer of friendship, given without expectation or pressure, meant more to Violet than she could express. She turned her hand over and squeezed his fingers briefly before pulling away. "Thank you, Samuel. That means more than you know." After lunch, he asked if she would like to see the ranch. "I know you probably need to get back, but I have a gentle mare who needs exercise. We could go for a ride if you are comfortable with horses." Violet had not been on a horse since childhood, but the thought of getting out of town, of seeing something beyond the dusty street and the four walls of her room appealed to her. "I would like that." The Ingram Ranch sprawled across several hundred acres of desert and grassland, with the mountains rising dramatically in the background. The main house was a low, adobe structure that blended into the landscape, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings. Cattle dotted the distant pastures and horses grazed in a nearby paddock. Samuel introduced her to his two ranch hands, men named Pete and Juan, who tipped their hats respectfully before returning to their work. Then he led her to the barn where he saddled two horses with practiced efficiency. "This is Daisy," he said, indicating a pretty chestnut mare with a white blaze. "She is gentle as can be. Just sit easy and let her follow my horse." He helped Violet mount, his hand strong but careful as he ensured she was secure in the saddle. Then he swung up onto his own horse, a rangy gray gelding, and led them out at a walk. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, heading toward the foothills. The desert landscape had a stark beauty that Violet was beginning to appreciate, all that open space under an endless sky. The only sounds were the steady clip of hooves and the occasional call of a hawk overhead. "It must get lonely out here," Violet said eventually. "Sometimes," Samuel admitted, "but I like the quiet. After my father died, a lot of people told me I should sell the ranch, move somewhere more civilized. But this land is in my blood. I cannot imagine living anywhere else. I felt that way about Philadelphia once. Now I cannot imagine ever going back." "You think you will stay in Chloride?" "I do not know. I came here because I needed to disappear for a while. I had not thought much beyond that." Samuel reined in his horse on a small rise that looked out over the valley. "I hope you will stay, but I understand if you cannot. Running from something, it takes as long as it takes to feel safe again." Violet pulled Daisy to a stop beside him. The afternoon sun painted everything gold, and the air smelled of sage and dust. She looked at Samuel's profile, at the quiet strength in his features, and felt something shift inside her. 3 months ago, my brother Daniel was murdered over a gambling debt he did not owe. The man who killed him was arrested, but his brother Theodore blamed us for the trouble. He threatened me, said I would pay for Daniel's interference. The police did nothing. My friends told me to leave, so I picked the most remote place I could find on a map and came here. The words tumbled out before she could stop them, the whole story she had been holding inside since arriving. Samuel listened without interrupting, his expression growing grave. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "This Theodore Webb, do you think he would follow you all the way out here?" "I do not know. I hope the distance is enough, but I am terrified every day that he will find me." "Does anyone back east know exactly where you are?" "No. I only told people I was going west. No specific destination." Samuel nodded slowly. "That is good. A man like that, he might look for a while, but if he has no leads, eventually he will give up. Men like that are cowards at heart. They prey on easy targets." He turned to look at her directly. "You are not alone anymore, Violet. Whatever happens, you have people here who will stand with you." "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough. I know you are brave even if you do not feel it. I know you have been dealt terrible blows, but you are still standing. And I know that I care about what happens to you, probably more than is wise given we have known each other less than 2 weeks." He smiled slightly. "But my father always said when you know something is right, you know it in your bones, and this feels right." Violet felt tears spill over and did not bother to wipe them away. "I am so tired of being afraid. Then let me help you. Let me be someone you can lean on while you find your strength again." They rode back to the ranch as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, and Violet felt lighter than she had in months. The fear was still there, would probably always be there in some measure, but it felt more manageable with Samuel beside her. Over the following weeks, they fell into a pattern. Samuel would come to town several times a week for supplies or business and would always stop by to see Violet. They would have lunch or take walks, talking about everything and nothing. Slowly, carefully, Violet began to emerge from her shell of terror. She started helping Mrs. Patterson with the cooking, needing something to occupy her hands and mind. She visited Sarah Colton at the schoolhouse and began assisting with the younger children's reading lessons. She explored the town more, learning the rhythms of life in this small mining community. And always, there was Samuel. Patient, kind Samuel who never pushed but was always there. He brought her books from his father's collection, knowing she loved to read. He taught her to ride better, taking her on longer excursions into the desert. He made her laugh with stories about stubborn cattle and clever horses. He made her feel safe. One evening, about 6 weeks after her arrival, they sat on the porch of the boarding house watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Samuel had his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. "I need to tell you something," he said finally. "I have grown very fond of you, Violet. More than fond, if I am being honest. I know the timing is probably terrible and you have been through so much. But I have never felt this way about anyone before, and I think you should know." Violet's heart hammered in her chest, but not from fear this time. From something else entirely, something that felt like hope and longing mixed together. "Samuel, I am broken right now. I am not sure I have anything whole to give you. You do not have to be whole. I am not asking for anything you cannot give." He looked at her with those pale blue eyes that had become so dear to her. "I am just asking if maybe someday you might feel the same way. And if you do not, if you only ever see me as a friend, that is all right too. I will still be here." She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I do feel the same way. It terrifies me, but I do. You have been the best thing about coming to Chloride, the best thing that has happened to me in a very long time." Samuel's face broke into a smile that made him look boyish despite his 30 years. "Really, really. But I am still scared, Samuel, not of you but of everything else, of being happy and having it ripped away, of bringing danger to you, of not being strong enough." "Then we will be scared together," he said simply. "And we will figure it out as we go." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. It was chaste and sweet and filled with promise, and Violet felt something in her chest that had been frozen for months finally begin to thaw. The summer deepened, and with it, Violet's relationship with Samuel grew. He courted her properly, always respectful, never rushing. They spent long afternoons at the ranch, Violet learning the workings of cattle and horses. She proved to have a natural way with the animals, a gentle patience that Samuel's ranch hands remarked upon. "You have a gift," Juan told her one day as she worked with a skittish colt. "The horses trust you." Violet stroked the colt's neck, marveling at the fact that something as nervous as this young horse could sense her calm when she felt anything but she was calmer, she realized. The constant trembling had eased. She slept more than she had in months. She smiled and meant it. One Saturday in August, Samuel took her to a dance in Silver City, the larger town about 20 miles away. It was Violet's first real outing beyond Chloride, and she was nervous about being in a bigger crowd. But Samuel kept close, his presence a steady anchor, and she found herself actually enjoying the evening. They were standing at the refreshment table when Violet heard someone call Samuel's name. She turned to see a well-dressed couple approaching, the man about Samuel's age and the woman slightly younger. "Sam Ingram, as I live and breathe," the man said with a broad smile. "Haven't seen you in months." "Robert, good to see you." Samuel shook the man's hand warmly. "Violet, this is Robert Shaw and his wife Elizabeth. Robert and I went to school together in Santa Fe before I moved back to the ranch." They exchanged pleasantries, and Robert asked about the ranch. Samuel filled him in on recent developments, his arm settling comfortably around Violet's waist. The casual intimacy of the gesture was not lost on the Shaws, who exchanged knowing glances. "We should have dinner before the night is out," Elizabeth suggested. "I want to hear all about how you two met." As they talked, Violet felt a prickle of awareness, the old instinct that had kept her alive back in Philadelphia. She glanced around the crowded hall and froze. Across the room, near the entrance, stood a man who looked startlingly like Theodore Webb. Same build, same dark hair, same way of standing with his weight on one leg. Her vision tunneled and her breathing went shallow. Samuel felt her stiffen against him and followed her gaze. "What is it?" he asked quietly. "That man by the door. He looks like Theodore Webb." Samuel studied the man in question. "Stay here with Robert and Elizabeth. I will go check." "No, Samuel, do not." Violet grabbed his arm, panic rising. "If it is him, if he has found me, then we will deal with it, but we need to know." He squeezed her hand. "Trust me." He walked across the hall with purpose while Violet stood frozen, her old fear roaring back to life. Robert and Elizabeth looked confused but tried to make conversation, clearly sensing something was wrong. Violet could barely hear them over the pounding of her heart. She watched Samuel approach the man and say something. The man turned, and even from a distance, Violet could see it was not Theodore Webb. The features were different, the age wrong. Just someone who happened to have a similar build. Relief made her knees weak. Samuel spoke with the man for another moment, then returned to Violet's side. "His name is Marcus Turner, works for the railroad, not your Theodore Webb." He took her hands, which were trembling violently again. "You are all right. It was just a resemblance." "I am sorry," Violet whispered. "I thought I was getting better, but I just panicked." "Hey, no apologies needed. Anyone would have reacted the same way." He looked at the Shaws. "I am sorry to cut the evening short, but I think we should head home." They made their goodbyes, and Samuel guided Violet out to where their wagon waited. The ride back to Chloride passed in silence, Violet wrapped in a blanket against the cooling night air and her own resurgent fears. Samuel drove with one hand, the other holding hers tightly. When they reached the boarding house, he helped her down and walked her to the door. "Are you going to be all right?" "I do not know. For weeks I have been feeling stronger, like maybe I was healing. But tonight, all it took was one moment and I was right back where I started." Healing is not a straight line, Violet. There will be setbacks. That does not erase all the progress you have made. He cupped her face gently in his hands. "You are not the same terrified woman who stepped off that stage 2 months ago. You are stronger than you think." "I want to believe that." "Then believe it, and believe in us." He kissed her softly, a real kiss this time, tender and full of feeling. "I love you, Violet Owens. I know it is fast and I know the timing is complicated, but it is true. I love you and I want a future with you." Violet looked up at this good man who had somehow become essential to her existence, who had spoken softly until she smiled and stayed, and felt the last of her resistance crumble. "I love you too. I am still scared of so many things, but I am not scared of that. I love you." They stood on the porch holding each other while the night settled around them. Two people who had found something precious and unexpected in this harsh desert land. The next morning, Samuel arrived at the boarding house earlier than usual with a serious expression. "There is something I need to tell you. I sent a telegram to a friend of mine who is a U.S. Marshal. I asked him to look into Theodore Webb, find out if he is still a threat." "Samuel, you should have asked me first. I know, and I am sorry for overstepping. But I cannot stand by and watch you live in fear when maybe we can do something about it." He handed her a telegram. "This arrived this morning." Violet unfolded the paper with shaking hands and read, "Theodore Webb arrested 2 weeks ago, Philadelphia, charged with assault and attempted robbery. Serving 3-year sentence. No threat. Samuel, your friend, is safe." She read it twice, 3 times, not quite believing what she was seeing. "He has been arrested for 3 years. Looks like he made the mistake of threatening the wrong person. Someone with connections who actually went to the authorities." Samuel watched her carefully. "Does this help, knowing he cannot come after you?" Violet sat down heavily on the porch steps, the telegram clutched in her hands. 3 years. It was not forever, but it was time. Time to build a life here, time to heal, time to figure out who she was beyond her fear. Yes, it helps more than you can imagine." Samuel sat beside her and put his arm around her shoulders. "I want to ask you something, and I know it is fast, but I have never been one to do things in a conventional way." "What is it?" "Marry me. Not now, not until you are ready. But someday when you feel strong enough, marry me. Build a life with me here at the ranch. Let me spend the rest of my days making you feel safe and loved." Violet turned to look at him, at this man who had appeared in her darkest hour and offered light. "Are you sure? I am not the easiest person to love right now. I have never been more sure of anything. You are brave and kind and stronger than you give yourself credit for, and you make me want to be better than I am." He smiled. "Plus, you have a gift with horses, and I could use a partner in the horse breeding operation I want to start." She laughed, the sound surprising her. "Is that your main reason for proposing? Free labor?" "Absolutely. The fact that I am completely in love with you is just a bonus." His expression grew serious again. "What do you say, Violet? Will you marry me?" "Yes." The word came easier than she expected. "Yes, I will marry you." "Not right away. You are right that I need more time. But yes." He kissed her properly then, deep and sweet, and Violet felt the last threads of fear begin to dissolve in the warmth of his love. They set the wedding for October, after the worst of the summer heat had passed, and the fall roundup was complete. Those 2 months passed in a blur of preparation and growing happiness. Violet moved out to the ranch in September, staying in the small guest room with Mrs. Patterson's blessing, and the understanding that everything would be proper until the wedding. Living on the ranch transformed her in ways she had not anticipated. The work was hard but satisfying, and she discovered a passion for the horses that surprised everyone, including herself. She had a gift for gentling the difficult ones, a patience born of understanding what it meant to be afraid. Samuel watched her blossom with quiet joy. The trembling woman who had arrived in Chloride that June day was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more confident. She still had nightmares sometimes, still tensed at unexpected sounds, but the fear no longer ruled her life. The wedding was held at the small church in Chloride on a perfect October afternoon when the desert was painted in golds and russets. Sarah Colton stood as Violet's maid of honor, and Robert Shaw came all the way from Silver City to be Samuel's best man. Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears, and half the town turned out to celebrate. Violet wore a simple cream-colored dress and carried wildflowers. Samuel wore his best suit and could not stop smiling. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife and Samuel kissed her, Violet felt something she had thought lost forever: pure, uncomplicated joy. The reception was held at the ranch, tables set up in the yard and lanterns strung between the buildings. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. As the sun set and the stars began to emerge, Samuel pulled Violet away from the party to a quiet spot behind the barn. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Ingram?" "Happy, truly happy. I did not think I would ever feel this way again." She leaned against him. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for letting me in." He kissed the top of her head. "I have something for you, a wedding present." He handed her a small leather journal, its pages blank and waiting. "I know you like to write, and I thought maybe you would want to document our life together, or write stories, or whatever you want. Just thought you should have it." Violet opened the journal, running her fingers over the smooth paper. On the inside cover, Samuel had written in his careful hand, "For Violet Ingram, may all your pages be filled with joy." She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "It is perfect." They stood together under the desert stars, two people who had found each other against all odds, and Violet knew that she was finally, truly home. The years that followed were good ones, full of hard work and deep contentment. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Violet's skill with horses became well known in the territory, and they built a successful breeding program. Samuel expanded the cattle operation and proved to be as good a businessman as he was a rancher. Their first child, a son they named Daniel after Violet's brother, was born the following August. He came into the world with a healthy cry and his father's pale blue eyes. Violet wept as she held him, overwhelmed by love and grief mixed together, mourning the brother who would never meet his nephew while celebrating this new life. Samuel held them both, his own eyes wet. "He would have been proud of you," he said quietly. "Your brother. Proud of how you survived and built this life. I hope so. I wish he could have known you." "I wish I could have known him. But we will tell Daniel all about his uncle. He will know he was named for a good man." 2 years later, their daughter Sarah arrived, named for the school teacher who had become Violet's dear friend. Sarah came into the world during a spring thunderstorm, entering life with the same dramatic flair she would carry through childhood. The children thrived in the desert air, growing strong and wild and free. Daniel proved to have his father's quiet strength and his mother's way with animals. Sarah had her mother's determination and her father's kindness. Together, they filled the ranch house with laughter and noise and all the beautiful chaos of family life. Violet wrote in her journal regularly, documenting their days, the small moments and large milestones. She wrote about watching Daniel take his first steps, about Sarah's first word being horse, about the way Samuel looked at her across the dinner table after 15 years of marriage with the same love he had shown from the beginning. She also wrote about the fear that never completely left her, the shadow that would always be part of her story. But she wrote about how it grew smaller over the years, how it became something she carried rather than something that carried her. She wrote about learning that strength was not the absence of fear, but the choice to keep living despite it. In 1895, Samuel and Violet celebrated their 12th anniversary with a trip to Santa Fe, their first extended time away from the ranch since the children were born. Daniel, now 11, and Sarah, 9, stayed with Mrs. Patterson in town, excited by the adventure of it. They stayed in a real hotel with running water and electric lights, marveling at the modern conveniences making their way west. They ate in restaurants and visited galleries and walked the old plaza hand in hand like the young couple they once were. On their last evening, sitting in the hotel room as the city lights glowed outside, Samuel pulled Violet into his arms. "You ever regret it? Coming west, marrying a rancher, the hard life we have built?" "Never, not once," she kissed him. "You saved my life, Samuel Ingram, not just from Theodore Webb or the fear. You saved me from a future of being alone and broken. You showed me that I could be strong. You were always strong. I just gave you a safe place to remember it." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity mixed with the passion that had never dimmed. And Violet thought about how far she had come from that terrified woman who stepped off a stagecoach trembling with fear. The children grew, and the ranch prospered. Daniel showed early signs of taking over the operation someday, spending every spare moment learning from his father. Sarah, surprisingly, developed a passion for books and teaching, often visiting the schoolhouse to help Sarah Colton with the younger students. "She is going to be a teacher," Violet told Samuel one evening as they watched their daughter patiently explain arithmetic to a struggling student. "Following in her namesake's footsteps, Sarah Colton will be pleased." Samuel put his arm around his wife. "We have done well, haven't we? Built a good life here. Better than I ever imagined possible." In 1901, when Violet was 42 and Samuel was 48, they welcomed an unexpected third child, another son they named Thomas after Samuel's father. His arrival was a surprise and a joy, making them young parents again after thinking their family was complete. "We are going to be ancient by the time this one grows up," Samuel joked, cradling the tiny infant in his work-roughened hands. "Good thing we have help," Violet said, watching as Daniel and Sarah cooed over their new baby brother with obvious delight. Thomas was a happy baby who grew into a curious child, keeping his older siblings on their toes and bringing new energy to the ranch. Daniel was 17 when Thomas was born, already a skilled rancher in his own right. Sarah was 15 and had already announced her intention to attend normal school and become a teacher. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythm of seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. Daniel married at 23 to a rancher's daughter named Mary, and they built a house on the far end of the property, planning to take over more of the operation as Samuel aged. Sarah went to Santa Fe for normal school and returned to teach in Chloride, eventually marrying the new doctor who came to town. Thomas, growing up with much older siblings, became the surprise adventurer of the family, announcing at 16 his intention to study veterinary medicine in California. "How do we raise such ambitious children?" Samuel asked as they saw Thomas off at the train station. "We taught them they could be anything they wanted. We taught them to be brave." Violet held her husband's hand, both of them graying now but still strong. "We gave them roots and wings." In 1910, on their 27th wedding anniversary, Samuel and Violet sat on the porch of the ranch house watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained through all the years. Their hair was silver now, their faces lined with decades of desert sun and laughter, but their love had only deepened with time. "You remember the day we met?" Samuel asked. "You were shaking so hard I thought you might blow away in the wind. I remember you spoke so softly. You were so patient with me." Violet leaned her head on his shoulder. "I was terrified of everything, but somehow you made me feel safe. You smiled at me on that first walk to the boarding house. Just a small smile, but I knew then that you would be important to me." He kissed her temple. "Best decision I ever made, helping a frightened woman with her trunk. Best decision I ever made was letting you." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue. The ranch spread around them, a testament to their years of hard work and love. In the main house, they could hear Mary preparing dinner while Daniel's 2 children played in the yard. Sarah and her husband were coming for dinner with their daughter. Thomas had sent a letter saying he would be home for Christmas with a new degree and big plans. Life had given them more than either had dared to dream during those early days of fear and uncertainty. They had built something lasting, something good, something that would endure beyond their own years. "I love you," Violet said softly. "Thank you for speaking softly until I smiled and stayed." "I love you," Samuel replied. "Thank you for being brave enough to stay." The Wild West had tested them both, had thrown challenges and hardships and long days of back-breaking work at them. But it had also given them each other, had given them this life under endless skies, had given them a love that started with gentle words and patient kindness, and grew into something unshakable. Years later, when Violet was in her 70s, she would take out that journal Samuel had given her on their wedding day and write the story of how they met, so that their grandchildren would know. She would write about arriving in Chloride trembling with fear, about a cowboy who spoke softly and offered help without expectation, about learning that strength came not from being fearless, but from facing fear with someone who believed in you. She would write about love that healed and time that helped and the desert that had become home. She would write about building a life from broken pieces, about finding joy after grief, about second chances and the courage to take them. And at the end of the story, she would write, "I came west to hide from danger and found instead a reason to live. I met a man who saw past my fear to the person I could become, and he loved me into being that person. We built a life together in this harsh, beautiful land, and I would not change a single moment of it. This is my story. This is our love. May it inspire you to be brave when you are frightened, to stay when you want to run, to believe in the possibility of happiness even in the darkest times." Samuel and Violet Ingram lived out their days on the ranch they had built together, surrounded by family and the land they loved. Samuel passed away in his sleep at 79, with Violet holding his hand. She followed him 3 years later, at 75, on a spring morning when the desert was blooming with unexpected wildflowers. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones that read their names and the dates of their lives, and one shared epitaph chosen by their children. "Love conquers fear." The ranch continued through the generations, passed down through Daniel's line, each new generation hearing the story of how it all began, how their great-great-grandmother arrived in Chloride trembling with fear, and their great-great-grandfather spoke softly until she smiled and stayed. It became family legend, this love story forged in the Wild West, a reminder that sometimes the most important journeys are not the ones we plan but the ones we are forced to take, and that sometimes the people who change our lives forever are the ones who appear when we need them most, offering not grand gestures but simple kindness, not demands but patient presence, not pressure but the gift of time. And in that dusty New Mexico town, in the shadow of mountains that had watched countless stories unfold, this particular story became part of the landscape itself, woven into the history of a place and the memory of a family, a testament to the transformative power of love and the strength that can be found when one broken person meets another, and together they build something whole. The end came peacefully for both of them, as it should for people who had lived fully and loved deeply. But their story lived on, told and retold, each generation adding their own chapter while honoring the foundation laid by that frightened woman and that gentle cowboy who had the wisdom to speak softly and the patience to wait until she was ready to trust him with her heart. The Wild West had been more than a setting for their love story. It had been a crucible, a testing ground, a place harsh enough to break those who were not strong and beautiful enough to heal those who were willing to try. For Violet and Samuel, it had been both challenge and salvation, the backdrop against which they had written their particular chapter in the grand narrative of lives lived at the edge of civilization. They had come to that place as individuals marked by loss and responsibility. They had found each other through chance and kindness. They had chosen love despite fear, commitment despite uncertainty, hope despite every reason to despair. And in so doing, they had created something that endured beyond their own years, a legacy not just of land and children but of the simple truth that love, offered gently and accepted bravely, can heal even the deepest wounds. In the end, it was not a story about the Wild West at all, though that was where it unfolded. It was a story about two people who found each other when they both needed finding, who built a life together one day at a time, who proved that happiness after tragedy was possible if you were willing to be vulnerable enough to try. And every time the story was told, it ended the same way. She arrived trembling with fear. The cowboy spoke softly until she smiled and stayed. And together, they lived happily ever after, building a love that would outlast them both, a love that became legend, a love that proved that sometimes the greatest courage is simply choosing to stay.